Hello everyone. So today we'll be going through the most common vulnerability checks which are followed across all the organizations or must be followed across all the organizations and for each and every application before you want to go live or whenever you want to have a release. So let's get started. So the first one is owasp top 10. So this methodology is a combination of data-driven analysis and industry surveys and standards where every year or every few years the top 10 most significant application vulnerabilities found across the world are updated and considered in the top 10 list. So let's go with the first part, which is broken access control. Now, token access control is considered as of now the most vulnerable section, it's in the top one because almost all of the applications are facing these issues, and based on that, they have categorized it as number category one. So where the issue is like access control is being compromised, which is leading to data issues. So mostly, if you have observed last 2 3 years since the COVID started, there is a lot of cyber attacks and data compromises happen for a lot of the companies for which the governments have fined them. So so here, like the broken access control occurs because of the unauthorized access of data and resources. It is one of the most important for your application. Like you should be securing your application for any unauthorized access. So now access control or ACL can be implemented to have the authorized access, like whoever is the user, only he should be intended, he should be the one intended to use your application or uh, have the proper access and the legitimate access to access your application with proper authorization that he has only access to at a particular limit. Now, access controls are harder to implement, so the first thing is to communicate the importance of implementing proper access control across the organizations to various teams like developing team, testing team, then DevOps team, and various other teams. And we need to implement a lot of methods, like we can have a rule where we can deny all the requests by default, and we can also have some kind of API limiting for the particular APIs. So those all things needs to be decided during the website or the app development phase. Coming to the next most common one, which is the vulnerability in the top 10. So it is cryptographic failure. So this cryptographic failure is either due to the bad implementation of encryption, or you may be using an outdated encryption methodology or algorithm which is replaced by a new one or the more efficient one. So in these cases, what happens is like the weak algorithms or the legacy ones are has some vulnerability or the flaw which is being utilized by the attacker to gain access and secure and then the breach happens because of the security being compromised. Also, it may be the case where you have a compromised key which is being used to decrypt your data. So this can be again be taken care if you have the algorithms up to date and you are doing the key rotation whenever needed. Like if you have a policy, or you can have a certain kind of policy that after 90 days your keys must be rotated. Also, like if you're using some AES algorithm, so you can just use the latest one, that is AES 256 or 512, which is the latest available in the market. So those kind of algorithms you can implement in your application, so that it is very hard to for the attacker to break or go through the algorithm or pass the algorithm and do the hack or attempt. Okay, so the next part is injection. So injection is a risk category which refers to ability of the threats, where what happens is like you have some input form or or you have some kind of web page or web form where you're taking the input, and the input is not sanitized, and because of that, like there is certain scripts which are being executed from your input section. So one of the most common may be SQL injection. So this you must be knowing by now. Like SQL injection is like suppose you have a web form and you have name field or the date of birth field, where you have certain validations, like name should only have characters. Nobody will be having an integer in the name part, or date of birth can be in a certain format, and it should be the only a separate format, and there should be no other thing which should be passed as input from that section. So what happens is, if you don't sanitize it, so sanitize the input form or the input of data, it allows it can allow the attacker to expose or inject some SQL code or some unwanted code and get it executed on your server, because your inputs are not being sanitized. So uh, that is one of the way where the injection happens. There are other kind of injections like NoSQL, etc., but you can just go through that. This is just for your to understand like what does injection mean and what is owasp top 10. Again, going to the next section, which is insecure design. Now this is in the category 4. This is coming up on nowadays, because there is a lot of design change with the upcoming upcoming cloud market or the IoT, where like most of the companies want to go to cloud IoT and use the latest services or the latest technologies. So what happens is, like in that due to the less experience in design, or the architecture not being given a proper thought around the design and architecture, due to that the insecure design part is happening, and it is allowing the attackers to expose or exploit the weak architecture and go through and steal the data, sensitive data, and perform some malicious actions. So to prevent this, like you have to sanitize your design and make it like reviewed by several experienced architects, as well as the even the cloud providers. You can have them to review your architecture for the best practices being followed and the best design process being followed. Then you also need to check for the latest tools and technologies, whatever are being used and being replaced in the legacy architecture. So these are the things you need to consider. Then is the next misconfiguration is like misconfiguration occurs when you use some version of the application or infrastructure which is being exposed earlier or has vulnerabilities. So what happens is, like because of that misconfiguration, like when a hacker tries to get all the configuration and has the knowledge, like this is the particular component where which can be used to come in and steal the data, so he can use that. So, and this is particularly again happening in the cloud IoT, etc., because day to day the world is changing, technology is changing, and people don't have much expertise. Maybe same person is doing multiple things like development and handling infra as well as the cloud, etc., so you may not have the proper expertise, and suppose your company doesn't have dedicated resource who have the specialization in their fields. So what happens is, you can make some insecure configuration, or you can, if you're using Docker, so some of the images you built for your application may not be secure enough. So those kind of misconfiguration may happen, and because of that the attacker may steal your data or cause harm to your organization. So to change this, or a pivotal strategy would be to have a repeatable hardening configuration process. So you can considering if you are using VM or EC2, you can have a hardened EC2 with CIS benchmark or other foundations benchmark, and you can have that monthly or means weekly, depending on your organization's choice or the policy. Suppose you consider monthly, so every month you can have a hardened AMI which can be called a golden AMI, and be shared with all the various DevOps, infra or application team, so that they can use that hardened AMI and configure their applications, which will allow them to be in a safer side from the misconfiguration part. Coming to the next section, which is vulnerable and outdated components, and this happens when when threat actors try to compromise an application where the application parts or the components have vulnerability which is not caught earlier. So what happens is like when you use outdated libraries which are vulnerable, so hacker or the attacker can exploit that particular library you are using and then get access or perform malicious action. So the overall mitigation strategy here would be to have an effective patch management system for your, if it's considered for EC2 or VMs, it should be like, or even the Docker containers, you should have some kind of patch management strategy. And apart from that, you have to regularly scan for your third-party libraries. So in case of software component analysis, SCA, which we have seen earlier, if you do that or scan your third-party libraries, so you can easily avoid such kind of issues. Going to the next section, which is identification and authentication failure. So in this, what happens is like authentication failure is there, and identity management makes application vulnerable to threat actors masquerading the legitimate users. So some examples of these vulnerabilities include like if we don't have any validity session validity being set up, like for us the session may be for 5 or 10 minutes. So any kind of things can be set up for legitimate users, and beyond that it should not be permitted, and they should be asked for again some kind of login or some kind of authentication permissions, authorizations. Then further we should implement a password strategy which may be of like example, we can have 18 or 19 characters which should have the special characters, digits, etc., so that the weak passwords are eliminated, and it's not easy to guess. So password combination should be complex enough. Then we can also have like some kind of rate limiting where users cannot have multiple login attempts, like maybe maximum 3 login attempts are allowed in a day. So those kind of things can help you with the identification and authentication failures. Also, you should have some kind of policy which you have some recommended password length, complexity, and rotation of the tokens or policy or password policy for everyone. Then going to the next part, which is software and data integrity failures. So here what happens is making faulty assumptions with development pipelines about the integration of the software. So you have your own applications, but you are also integrating it on in today's world with various plugins or libraries from external sources, because you want to expand your network or you want others to use your application. So if you don't verify those integrity of the application or libraries, so it introduces the risk of malicious code to be inserted from that part, and you can also have unauthorized access or your compromisation of access from those sections. So for mitigation is strategies to include external code and always have a check on that on the plugins and libraries, so that they are not tampered and they have the required digital signatures. Then going to the next section, which is security, login, and monitoring. So you must always have, this is very very important to have a logging and monitoring system for your all of your accounts or application, cloud, etc. So it helps to analyze what has happened or what is going on. Even you can have some threshold limits for all the errors, where you can define a circuit breaker. Like, so the circuit breaker is like you can set up rules for 403 error, that is access denied error, I mean unauthorized error. So 403, 401, such kind of setups you can do. Like whenever the log have more than certain limit, it should be alerted to you. Similarly, for the whole application, you can set the monitoring alerts. Like whenever the CPU is higher than 80%, it should send an alert to the team, or the memory is higher. So once you set up the monitoring tool, you have the logging things done. Then we need to implement an incident recovery or the incident response strategy for the application or for the team. So this will help you a lot in cases to analyze what is going on with the application or how your application is performing, and in case of any attack it can be easily tracked and you can recover instantaneously. And going to the last part of the OWASP top 10, which is the request forgery server side. So what happens in today's world is like most web applications require external sources for their functionality, like which are usually some URLs, so which may be some kind of API available. So if that is affected, it will affect your application, because most of the times you may be just allowing them simply by not having any authorization token, or uh, doing a proper sanity on that. So it is recommended you should do every time the proper sanity, and you should also set up a rate limit for that also, so that potentially it will avoid any bypass of the control access, and help you with help you to avoid any unwanted circumstances. So also, like if you have some internal endpoint which is internal to your application, so you just trust it blindly and you don't do any kind of authentication, authorization, or rate limiting. So if somehow the external party or the external uh, actor gets access, so he can simply, once he gets the access, he can do anything he likes. So it is important to even sanitize your inputs for the internal URL available to your company or application, or have a rate limiting, so that even those are being considered important. And even if you have if somehow somebody has gained the access for the internal endpoints, they can let's say it can be simply tackled and easily monitored, and we can just avoid such kind of unusual activity scenarios being avoided for the future. Okay, so let's go through our last section, which is the SANS top 25. Again, like SANS 25 has their own 25 top most dangerous software flaws in a list, which may be dangerous because it lets again allows the attacker to gain control of the software and steal data and information, which is very important in today's world. It may also prohibit and stop some of the functioning. So SANS 25 is a versatile starting point where which can be utilized by almost any organization, regardless of the size, industry, geography, and commercial status. So the common vulnerabilities and exposures team generated the list using public available data, CWE mapping from National Vulnerability Database, and CV score of each CWE, and a scoring algorithm was used to determine like how much severity each fault has. So here is a list of all the SANS top 25 vulnerabilities. You can just go through, and again, like some of them may be repeating from OWASP top 10, because it's a separate standard. So all these standards you can set up like OWASP top 10 and SANS top 25 with your security tools you have. So in our case, in the SonarQube, we have these rules or the standards. We can just go through there and see if any vulnerabilities are listed, so which will help you to resolve how to resolve that, and also explains like why it is considered a vulnerability, and what is the exact issue with the code, how we can avoid that. Thanks for joining for the tutorial.